Welcome to the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and on this episode, we are talking to Kacie Main, author of the book, I Gave Up Men for Lent, the story of a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl's search for meaning. Welcome to the show, Kacie.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you on. And you know what? I feel like I've known you for years after reading your book, you know. So this is what happened. So I wasn't able to get an actual copy, but I was able to go on Apple listening to your podcast. I was roaming
hmm
through and I noticed that you actually read the book on your podcast, like part one, part two, part three. And I was so happy. So
Yes.
so I was able to actually listen to the book, listen to you read it to me, which was
Yep.
fantastic, by the way. So that's why I feel like I just feel like I know you.
Yeah. It's funny. I get that feedback a lot. People are like, "Oh, wow, I know a lot about you, and you know nothing about me." And I'm like, "Yep."
Right. So go ahead and tell, since the audience hasn't had the pleasure of reading the book yet, but I'm sure they will after we finish talking about it. Go ahead and tell just a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write the book.
Yeah. So I've kind of lived your just very typical life. I grew up, had a good childhood. Went to college, got a job, all that stuff. Had a great life. And then around 32, I just started to feel very, I don't know, just kind of like blah. And I thought the reason was because I was single at 32 and I had really just had a really pretty bad relationship history, especially in my 20s. I had gotten myself into some situations that were not ideal, to say the least. And so I don't know, I just kind of felt disconnected from life, like pretty just like uninspired. Then I felt guilty for feeling that way because I had a great life. Like I had a good job, good friends, good family,
Right.
like all that stuff. But I just didn't, I don't know, I didn't feel very connected or excited by my life. And it was right before Lent started. So I grew up Catholic. I say that I'm not a great Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I wouldn't consider myself to be very religious at this point in time in my life, but I've still always practiced the idea of giving up something for Lent because I like the concept of like a challenge, like with a
Right.
short kind of window, like what can I do for 40 days? And so I've always typically given up something, and it's usually, like soda or sweets or, something like that. And this year I was thinking, or the year that I wrote the book, which was 2017, I was like, oh, what am I going to give up this year? And when I really thought about it, I'm like, my vice is men and relationships and just my kind of negative outlook on dating. And it wasn't negative in any kind of man hating way. It was almost the opposite. It was like I was so feeling kind of just desperate, almost like I just needed to be in a relationship, and that was causing me to have all these kind of unhealthy approaches towards any kind of dating or relationship scenario in my
Right.
life. And so I decided that I needed like a little bit of space from all of it. I just wanted a break from all of the mental energy that goes into dating.
Yeah.
And so I gave up men for Lent.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about it. So, but I want to just commend you because, oh my gosh, you were so brave and so courageous to write this book. And boy, I could relate so much to you. I could relate so much to your mother.
hmm
I saw myself in your mother just because I have a son who kind of I could see where your relationship with her and how you would kind of push her away and she's trying to help. I could totally identify myself with my son like that. But at any
hmm
rate, yeah, and I really, really enjoyed your dad in the book and gosh, so many people. So we're gonna
Yeah.
get into it. Yeah. So but when you wrote the book, I know you said that you changed names of people.
hmm
Of course, you had to do that to protect, of course, their identity and all of that. Um, and you began in your introduction really sort of apologizing ahead of time to people because you're like, I know, that you're going to read this and you're probably going to be surprised maybe, or it may hurt your feelings, but I have to do this. So what were you thinking? Like, I mean, did you actually have people who kind of got upset maybe after they read it and they saw themselves in it, or what did, what did you experience?
Yeah, that part was really hard because when I was actually writing the book, like I kind of just the only way I was able to write it in a very real, honest, and raw way was, not under the thinking of, okay, I'm going to publish this out into the world. I really try to just stay in the mindset of all you're doing is writing it, and that doesn't mean anything other than you're writing it. And so that helps me keep things like just very raw and honest. And when I got a little further into the process and started getting into kind of the publishing, decisions and all of that, that's when it really hit me like, oh man, just how interconnected we all are. Like I all I wanted to do was tell my story, just
Mm-hmm.
my side of my story. But when you do that, you start to realize like this, okay, my story is just connected with so many other people, but it's just one chapter of their story. And so it's not a fair portrayal of who they are. Like I can't tell their side of it.
Yeah.
And I recognize not everybody wants to write a tell all book and air all their dirty laundry, to anybody who wants to read or listen to it. And so I respect that. And so it was a difficult decision. I almost published the book under a pen name actually. And then I thought, I can't put this book out there that's all about, be you and live your truth and then do it under a fake name. That just didn't feel right. So I, what I did was really like several of the editing processes or editing rounds. I was like, okay, does this really need to be in here? Like certain parts. And there were a couple parts I took out because I thought, okay, this doesn't necessarily lend to the story, and is maybe unnecessary damaging, to this character. So I did edit it down a little bit from its original version, but for the most part, I haven't heard from any of the ex-boyfriend characters
Right.
except for one who is just a very, I don't know, self-assured individual. So he just really didn't care about him and I's history being out into the world. And the others, I mean, several of them, I hadn't even spoken to or seen in years. And
Mm-hmm.
I've not heard from them. I do not know if they read the book, if they know about the book. I'm sure they probably do. But they have not felt the need to reach out to me. And so I haven't had to deal with that. My family, there's a lot of family dynamics in
Yeah.
there, as you mentioned. And it's funny, the feedback they've gotten, like a lot of people have said to my dad, like, oh my God, how are you doing with your daughter put out this, book that shares all this stuff. And he's like, listen, like we lived through it. Like this was our life. He's like, it was much harder to live through than it was to read it. And so he took a very just kind of, whatever, it's out for other people to read. That doesn't matter as much as what our actual family went through. And, my mother and I have had several additional conversations about things because as mothers do, she read certain parts of it and she just kind of then took the blame herself. And she's like, I didn't mean it like that, like in certain conversations. And
Yeah.
so, I had to say, I know, Mom, I know you didn't, but that's how I took it at the time, which
Yeah.
was my reality at the time, which is kind of what I base decisions off of. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just, it was kind of nice because it was like laying this foundation of honesty to then springboard like conversations that maybe we would have never had or really cleared the air on. So ultimately it ended up being a good thing, I think,
Yeah.
especially for me and my parents and our relationship.
Yeah, I think so too. Because as I read it or as I heard it being read, I could totally just feel, you can just really connect with you. And, just, I think anybody who reads this book is going to, at some point or another throughout the book, see themselves in
Mhm.
you or see themselves in other people that are in the book. And so I'm glad that you were, just bare it all. And I'm glad that you were rawly honest about, your experiences and what you were going through because that really, Casey, is what helps people. And
Mhm.
yeah, and that's why when I have people on this show, the Lovers Lounge, I like to really have people just be real about their experiences because there's somebody listening who is going to see themselves in you. And at that point, when they make that connection, then they'll probably see, you know what? I think I need to go through a similar process. I think I need to
Mhm.
do what Casey did because I can totally see myself, in her. And I could totally see, how I've experienced some of the things she experienced. And so I'm just glad that you did. And thank you for being on the show once again.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really what's been the greatest part of all this process is the feedback I've gotten of people saying, "Oh my gosh, like I felt like you were reading my journal, or I can so relate." And it's really been just so eye-opening to me that I just really believe we all like go through kind of the same internal struggles. Like they're wrapped in different circumstances in terms of what our life looks like and different relationships and how things play out. But kind of those deeper struggles of, who am I? Why am I here? Our insecurities, our issues with self-worth or guilt, and really kind of going after the life we want, and all the fear that's involved in that, and caring about what other people think. Like all of these things so many of us experience, and we don't necessarily always admit it. And
Yeah.
so I think when you hear someone else be honest that, yeah, like this is what I'm struggling with, and I don't necessarily have the answers, like it sucks, like if anything, it makes you feel less alone. And I think there's just so much power in that.
Absolutely. And that's why, as I'm doing this interview with you, I just really want you to be honest, because as people are listening, I think that's really how you connect with them and how you reach them. I know
Oh, absolutely.
when I heard you on another podcast, I can't remember whose podcast, but anyway, I was listening and I heard you say you gave up men for Lent, and then you went to the extent of and alcohol, and I was like, what? So anyway,
just hard alcohol
yeah.
at the time. Yeah, I added in a couple things because I didn't want to seem like this just really jaded girl, even though I kind of was. So I added in social media, sweets, and hard liquor. And that was really just the beginning of my starting to question my relationship with alcohol in general.
Yep.
And actually, after that Lent, I ended up quitting drinking completely for
Wow.
9 months.
Wow. And as I listened to the book, I made the connections. I made the connections to where I could see why you probably included the alcohol, and maybe we'll get into that a
Hmm.
little bit. So, because you literally reflected on every relationship and every mistake that you made with men. No, that was good because, like I said,
Yeah.
I connected with you in so many different levels, and I'm sure that other women and maybe even men too, if they read the book, they will certainly, understand. So, do you think that like pressure from like society and maybe even family expectations and all of that creates such a pressure for you, which kind of maybe led you to trying to connect in all of these relationships or just trying to make it work or hope that it worked? That pressure of, okay, so when are you going to have a family and when are you going to,
Hmm.
those kind of things that maybe you would get from family, or just kind of looking and thinking, okay, my brother's had a child, my sister's a, okay, my clock's ticking, I need to be doing this too, so maybe the next person it's going to work. So, do you think some of those things kind of played a part in the relationships and you're really, trying to make it work with them?
Definitely. I think there's a couple things at play, and I think a lot of women experience. And one is the just kind of societal pressure, and it's amazing if you really pay attention to it. And when you really think about it, like what people thought it was okay to say to me or to ask me, as you get into your 30s was when I really started to see this difference. But I had also moved back home to Jacksonville, Florida, which is a little bit more old school in its thinking than South Florida, where I was living before. But for people to say like, "Oh, are you married? Oh, why not?"
Right.
Or "Oh, have you ever been engaged? Are you divorced?" Like just that kind of just mind blowing. Like, why do they not understand why you're single? Like that
Mm-hmm.
puts on a lot of pressure. I got a lot of pressure from my family, and it's like it's not from a bad place. My parents have a great marriage. They've been married. Oh, I should know this. I feel like they're coming up on 40 years or some big anniversary,
Yeah.
and they have a very happy marriage. So I understand, like that is part of my mother's definition of happiness is marriage, because she's had a great marriage, as do my brother and sister. So it's like they want that for me because they equate it to happiness. And so I think, while yes, I think marriage can be happy, I think ultimately the biggest driving force for like why I had this like need to make these relationships work was that I felt like I needed somebody else. Like I
Right.
couldn't make me happy just on my own. And I think when you kind of strip away a lot of the societal pressures, like, yeah, people can say things and ask things, but like, why does it ultimately bother me? Because I think I need it. And like,
Yeah.
why do I think I need to be with somebody else? Because I don't think I'm enough on my own.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big limiting belief that we all have when it comes to like a lack of self-worth. And it just manifests in our life in all of these negative ways because we don't feel like we are whole on our own. And I
Yeah.
mean, the programming for women starts really young.
I
Look at
know.
the Disney movies, and then even, you know, Jerry Maguire, like, you complete me. Like, now I just think that's the wrong message to be sending to women or to men. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to complete me. I want to be a whole. I want a whole next to me, and I want us to like do life together. And so that was an important like mindset shift that I had to first identify and then work through.
Yeah. So you had, I just love this. Like you had your childhood love, Lloyd,
Yeah,
and well, his character named Lloyd, and then you had
yeah,
Shane. Was it Shane? I believe it was Shane.
Shane. Yeah.
And
So
then,
all the character names
yeah.
are actually kind of like little inside jokes with that person.
Oh, so they,
So
yeah.
if
So if they
if
read the
they
book,
read the
yeah,
book, yeah,
yeah,
they'll be like, oh wow.
that's me, yeah. So you had Lloyd, you had Shane, you had Dave. Was it Dave?
hmm
David, Dave.
David, yes.
Yeah, you had Arlo.
hmm
I think Charlie.
Charlie, yep.
And then finally, I remember Ryan.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Ryan.
So, so anyway, but there were a lot of lessons, a lot of things you experienced through each of those. Boy, and each one of them, as you read and you talked about it, I could literally,
hmm
just kind of see, and that's why I say you did such an awesome job in reading that book. I know you kind of felt weird reading it at first because that was your first time doing that, right?
Yeah, so that is the audio version of my book,
Mm-hmm.
the audio that's up on Audible. And
Yeah.
so then I decided to put it up for free on the podcast for the book's first birthday, which was back in February. And then I'm definitely going to leave it up through Lent.
Yeah.
I might leave it up after that. I'm not really sure. But I mean, I love that people are listening to it, that you listen to it, and that you found me. That's great. So, you know, I might leave it up even longer. But yeah, it's funny. It ended up being this whole other element of processing everything because I think, and this is why like I'm a big believer in journaling, which I had never done prior to that book.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, we think about our lives or we reflect on relationships and we think through things, and that's great. But like our thoughts move so quickly that we're not processing it as much as if you were to like articulate it onto paper. So like forming thoughts into sentences, going back and reliving through relationships to the point of trying to like write it down as a story to explain to somebody else, like gets to a level of like slowed down detail that I think if you're just staying in your mind is really hard to do. So the process of writing those chapters of those past relationships was really tough at times and then ultimately like very therapeutic because
Yeah.
once I wrote it all down and then started to read through it, that's when you can't escape your patterns when they're like written down in front of you. And I'm just like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
here I am just always thinking these men never chose me, when in reality, like I never chose me. Like I would just kind of fall into the shell version of myself, just wanting to be who they wanted me to be. I wasn't sticking up for the life I wanted in all areas of life. So it's like, if I'm not choosing me, why are they going to choose me?
Yeah.
And so then when it got to the point of reading the audio, then it was like this whole other process of hearing myself like say it all out loud. I was just like, oh gosh, when does the
Oh
processing
my
ever
gosh.
end?
That's good. And talk about therapeutic. I can imagine because, as you're reading this and you're getting this all out, and then you're able to reflect as you're kind of going through all of this, and then you really are seeing the patterns and the similarities and all of this kind of stuff, and your behavior and what part you play in it, and then all the similarities of maybe the guys that you've been with and some of the reoccurring themes that seem to
hmm
pop back up. I mean, oh my gosh, that's why I say you're so brave. You're so brave. But
And it's interesting too to see like what all you remember, because when you really sit down and try and think back through a past relationship, like you kind of have your, your cornerstone memories of like, oh yeah, this happened. But then, like, the more you think about it, the more time you spend kind of in that past chapter, the more memories that come back. So, like, there was stuff that came back to me of things that happened in those relationships that I had kind of forgotten about. And so
Yeah.
then you start to get a more complete picture to really look at and be like, okay, what actually happened here? Like, and for me, the big realization is that, I wasn't the victim. Like, I was kind of my own villain, and I kept repeating my patterns and putting myself in these situations and then staying in these situations because I was just, I don't know, hopeless romantic or just had this need to make it
Make it
work.
work. Yeah.
And I was, never in a healthy place
Right.
in those relationships.
Okay. So there was an aha moment. There was a time, and I can't remember, like where, like, was it Lloyd, Shane, Dave, Arlo, Charlie, which, but there was a time when all of a sudden you had an aha moment, I think, where you were like, okay, enough is enough. So, like, when was that? What can you kind of share when that climax happened where you just thought, you know what, that did it. I've got to do something different.
Oh, I feel like I've had so many aha moments.
Yeah,
I
there
guess
were a lot.
my
Yeah.
the first aha moment that really is in the beginning of the book was with the David character, who was a good friend of mine, and he had a girlfriend, and
Yep.
then we went out and got drunk and ended up making out,
Yep.
and that's when I woke up after that, and I'm like, Kacie, like, come on, like, you've already done this other woman thing, and you don't want to do it anymore. So, like, why is this keep happening? And that's actually why I decided to give up Men for Lent, was that aha moment of, I recognize these bad decisions, but, like, I can't stop myself from making them. And then as far as another aha moment, I think it had to do with reflecting back on the Charlie
Yeah.
character.
Yeah. He was in my
And
head too. I was just thinking about it.
yeah, and really, because at that point that was like the third relationship I was reflecting back on, to be like, okay, it was the same thing over and over again, and then ultimately ended up being the same kind of emotional roller coaster with my mother, of letting her
Yeah.
back in, kind of telling her, then pushing her out because
Oh
I was,
gosh.
making these decisions I wasn't proud of and didn't want to be completely honest. And that one that one was a tough one. I carried a lot of guilt with that relationship for a long time, and then a little bit later in the book, I kind of have the aha moment of, okay, what good does the guilt do? You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is that happened. Like, I lived my life how I lived my life. Like, you can either choose to learn from it and make changes, but, like, living in just this guilt state isn't doing me or anybody any good.
Yeah. Boy, when you talk about Charlie, and I think even Arlo, there were some similarities there. But when you talk about that, and I think about your mom and your dad, and they were really trying because they were being protective of you. Like,
Mhm.
they didn't
Mhm.
want you to be hurt. And they saw some things, they saw writing on the wall. But at the time, you were younger and you just didn't see it. And you just believed in some of the things that Charlie or Arlo were saying. And so you were really hook, line, and sinker on it. But your parents, I think, kind of saw some stuff and they were trying to keep you from making a really bad choice or, going down the road even farther. And so your poor mother's like reaching out and she wants to help, but you're
I
like, no, no, I need to do this on my own. I totally saw myself there with you. No, I need to make this decision on my own. And gosh, my heart just went out to your mom because it's so hard to just allow your child, even though you see them and you see them about to have a train wreck, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but they
And
don't want you to help them. That is so hard.
yeah, and we have to live our own lives, and we have to make our own mistakes, and we have to fall down, and we have to pick ourselves up. Like, we can't do that for each other. Like, we can help, we can lend a helping hand. And there was an analogy I used in kind of relation to the Shane character, because everybody in my life, he was kind of in and out of my life, and
Yep.
all my friends and family were like, why do you keep going back to this man? And so kind of the analogy I used was, it's like I'm walking in a big hall of people, and I'm carrying a really heavy
Bag.
bag.
Yeah, I
And,
remember
like,
that.
everyone just wants me to drop the bag, and they're yelling at me, drop the bag, and they're trying to take it out of my hands. But, like, it's mine. And like, I'm only going to put it down when I'm ready. If you force me to put it down, I might keep walking, but I'm going to keep looking back.
Yeah.
And so then that's not good. It's like we have to, and I believe this to be true with relationships, and it can be so frustrating for friends and family, but it's like you've got to play them all the way out, because otherwise, if you don't live it out to the point where you're ready and done, and you know you're ready to walk away, not because someone else is telling you to, but like you're ready to walk away, then you're able to actually move forward. Otherwise, you might get another relationship, but your mind is going to keep going back to that relationship, and so then that's not fair to the
Good
person
either.
you're with. And that was a difficult thing, I think, for especially my mother to understand in a lot of my relationships, of why it took me so long to reach the point that they all thought was so obvious to them. But, it wasn't done yet for me. Like, I
Yeah.
guess I hadn't been hurt quite enough to really learn the lesson.
Yeah. You still had to move through your own process. You
Hmm.
had to reach your own bottom for each one of those situations. And gosh, how gut wrenching, again, for your parents to watch. But you're right. I mean, it was something that you had to do on your own.
Right. And I think that was a big part of it too, and that's why I love the kind of the family dynamic component of the book. Was I've since learned that process is called like individuation, where a child really kind of needs to break away from their parents and kind of draw the line of like, no, I am an adult. And I don't know at what age that normally happens, but for me it was in my 20s, while unfortunately I was also in these terrible relationships. But it was, at that point, it was not just about the relationships. It was about the fact that like I wanted to just live my own life. Like I didn't want opinions. I didn't want guidance. Like I just wanted to do it on my own.
Right. And you did. You did. Um,
I did, yeah.
so do you feel that, when you were moving from relationship to relationship, that this prevented you from really being able to pay attention to your own sense of self, while you're in it? I guess was it difficult then for you to see the whole maybe dysfunction of everything because you were in it? Do you think?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly. I was so focused outward. I was so focused on the other person and what they were doing, and if they wanted to be with me, and what their level of commitment was, and the decisions they were making and what they thought of me. It was all outward. And that's what I realized like ultimately happened with all the things I gave up for Lent. I mean, men, social media, even, drinking, sweets, all of that stuff was distractions for me that prevented me from ever going inward and really thinking, okay, there's another relationship I'm totally ignoring here. And that's the relationship that I have with myself. And like, how do I feel about my life? Like, how happy am I? Like, where am I currently heading? And like, where do I want to go? What do I want out of life? Like, I wasn't working at all on my relationship with myself because I was so focused on every other relationship in my life.
Right.
And so that was really like the biggest realization for me in the book was there is a relationship with self. And as with every other relationship, you've got to put work into it in order for you to stay connected and it to stay in a healthy place.
Right. Okay. So here we are. We're in the process then. You've made the decision to do this. It was really 40 days. I remember because it was April 17th and that's my birthday, right? So I
Mm,
remembered that date in the book because you kept telling, okay, April 17th, call
yep.
me then. You don't talk to me right now. Um, so you literally did go through 40 days. So talk about the process and maybe the reaction of people as you were going through this process in this Lent season.
Yeah. So when I told people, I was giving up Men for Lent, most people thought it was funny and kind of ridiculous and didn't really think much else of it. And really, in that 40 days, I became a little bit of a hermit. Like I wasn't very social. I didn't go out much. And I spent a lot of time. I went to the beach a lot. I watched sunrise. I walked on the beach. I had made the commitment to journal every day. So, I started writing. I had started listening to more, positive stuff. So I really just it's like my mind woke up to this whole new world of of thinking, and almost like just got more energized overall. And so I didn't, I wasn't out and as social as I normally was, like by any means for that 40 days. I really kind of just went inward and spent a lot of time alone, which I had never really been comfortable doing. Like I was always just out and about and go, go, go and social. And so even to just spend all that time alone, I think was really good for me.
Yeah.
And so really, I don't think anybody knew what was going on. Like nobody knew that I was going through this whole crazy like process and change. And even afterward, I started to tell people I was writing a book. And, at first I think people were kind of like, oh, okay, great. Like, sure you are. And, it was only until that process got further along that I think people started to really realize that I was serious about this. And
Right.
I mean, now everyone understands because, I quit my job, published a book, started a podcast, and have like a totally different career now. But I think it's hard for people to, especially people who are close to you, to understand and accept when you go through changes, because they care about you and they're afraid they're going to lose like the version of you that they love. So it was a little bit uncomfortable for some people at first, especially like when I quit drinking for 9 months, because that was just such a part of all my social circles. But
Right.
And for me, I looked at it as a test. Like I can continue to push through even though it's uncomfortable, and stick to being a version of me that feels truer to me versus who I kind of have been, or I can fold and, please everybody else and make everybody else more comfortable, yet kind of live in this disconnected state. And so it's kind of this constant test of like, all right, are you going to choose to be you, or are you going to be who everybody else kind of wants and expects you to be?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because speaking of tests, man, I think I remember a couple of instances in the book where, you're just about ready to finish this process, but somebody just keeps creeping up trying to kind of break you out of it. And I tell you, I kept thinking, boy, that darn enemy, like just he, you were trying to get to this 40 days and really finish this out, but then let me dangle this carrot in front of her and see if she really sticks it out for 40 days. Let this
Yeah.
guy call her and let me see if this, does it. And I mean, but you were sticking to your guns.
Yeah, for the most part, although, I would say I think I failed there at the very, very end,
And
which is kind of tragic in itself. But
Ryan, yeah.
it was interesting as, some of the kind of synergies that life or the universe, God, whatever you believe and want to call it, kind of sent me during those 40 days of people that I, ran into, like seeing Lloyd and
Mm-hmm.
just the timing of when I heard from people. So it was really also this big wake up moment for me of like, oh wow, like there's something bigger at play here. Like
Yeah.
there's a connection to life that I had never really been aware of yet. And so I have a whole new respect for what could be, brushed off as a coincidence, that it's not coincidence. It's all divine timing.
Isn't that something? Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So during the book, I think another very pivotal point for you anyway was when your friend's father brought up 3 points,
Hmm.
talking about your heads, the three different heads, and this is when you, I think, were at a low. I think you were at the gym and you were overhearing, as you were working out, this kind of self development coach speaking, um, talking about, feeling kind of unfulfilled and just kind of like blah about your life. And it like hit you at a time in which, that was exactly where you were. And this person starts talking about your purpose. And you're like, gosh, yeah, what is my purpose? I could
Hmm.
totally relate. And so you're like, gosh, I never even thought of it. I'm this old and I haven't even really figured out what my purpose is. And so that really, I think, got your wheels to turning. And then you ran into your friend's dad and you had lunch with him and he talked to you about these three heads. So tell me about that.
Yeah, that I loved that concept. Like that was really helpful for me. So he said, we all have three different heads, and we kind of dole out different importance to them at different stages of our life. So our first head is solely focused on kind of what we are putting out into the world. So like what we are portraying to the world. And our second head is all about the feedback that we get back. to like what people think about us. And so, you can think back through different stages of your life. Like I mentioned, high school, we're obviously all very much in our like first and second head. Like, are we cool? Are we popular? Whatever. What do people think of us? All that
Right.
stuff. Social media is very first and head focused. Like, what are you? What are your posts? Like, what is your profile? And then, the likes and the comments and all that. That's all first and second head. And then he said, then we also have a third head, and that is like who we truly are. And that some people, but not everybody, will reach a point, and it's usually not until probably around your 30s, where you start to be aware of like, oh, you have a third head, and it is kind of who you actually are. And you go on this journey, he said, to reconnect with that part of you and really just kind of forget about the first and second head altogether. And I loved that, because it was like, oh, that was exactly how I was feeling, and just absolutely like what I had been through. I had lived very much in my first and second head, and now had this wake up moment of, oh, hold on, there's a third head. Like, there's a real true me that I've been ignoring, and like, let me figure out who she is.
Yeah. That was really good. I mean, I really enjoyed, and I could totally see that. I mean, the three, what we're sharing with the world, what we get back, and then our true self and what we're really, really like. And so after hearing that, I could, throughout the book, then I could totally see like, okay, she's thinking with her first head. She's thinking with her third head. She's thinking with it, I could identify right away with
Yep.
things that you were going through. So you also mentioned something in the book that was really funny, Dick Sand. Tell the listeners what Dick Sand is. And, that was a lesson I think that you learned throughout all of this too.
Yes. So that's it's from the movie How to Be Single, which is just a really funny, cute movie if you haven't seen it, a little chick flick. But it's this concept of like when you start dating a guy that you fall into his dick stand, and your world just becomes his world. And so you kind of lose who you are as a person, and you just become kind of who he wants you to be. Like another popular reference is the old Julia Roberts movie Runaway Bride, and how in that movie, she constantly like runs away from her fiancés, but she always takes her eggs. However, her fiance at the time takes his eggs, like whether it be scrambled, sunny side up, poached,
Yes,
whatever.
yes.
And it's like that concept that we kind of mold ourselves into what we think somebody else wants us to be. And I think again that stems from this need to be with somebody,
Right.
rather than just have the self-acceptance, the self-love, and like the strength to just be who you are. Because if you have that strength to be who you are and not care so much if somebody else then wants to be with you, like that's how I think you find who you're truly meant to be with. Because when you start, and this is what I would always do, you start acting not like yourself, then like even if they do like that version of you, like that's going to get exhausting, like stifling who you are to be this version of yourself that you think the other person wants you to be. So that was a big, just kind of funny wake up moment to me. Like that's what I do. Like I fall into the dick sand, and I just become this person that I think this man wants me to be, rather than just be who I am.
Yeah.
And I think I was especially susceptible to that because I don't think I knew who I was for a while. And I think that can be common especially in your 20s. You're very living in the first and second head. And so if you're just constantly focused on kind of your profile that you're putting out into the world and then what feedback you're getting back, it's understandable how you can lose touch with like who you really are.
Yeah. Okay. So now, with the entire Lent process, looking back, I mean, again, there are so many aha moments, so many lessons that you've learned. I mean, you've just talked to us about Dick Sand. You've talked to us about a whole lot of things that you learned. But overall, what did you get out of the process, and how has it helped you in moving forward?
Overall, I would say, and I mentioned this before, it's just the concept of having a relationship with yourself, and that relationship takes work, and it takes time too. So to try and carve out some time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like sitting and meditating, but to just read or whether maybe it's when you work out or you take a bath or, you know, you sit and just be like, just not actually do anything, like just be. Like, we're so busy these days, and so much of our busyness is focused on other people or like what's happening on the internet. And I just now am such a believer in our relationship with ourselves, because it's, in my opinion, the most important relationship you'll ever be in. Like, it's the only one, you're never getting out of it. Like, you're not breaking up with yourself. Like, it's the only one that lasts your entire lifetime. And so just kind of that awareness that is a relationship that I don't want to ever ignore again. And as with every relationship, you can work on it and just continue to make it better.
All right. So, Kacie, how can the listeners hear more from you? Like, you've got to tell everybody about your podcast, and then, like, we've told them about your book, but I mean, they may want to order it, or where can they get it? Can they listen to it?
Yeah.
Can they get it on Audible? That kind of thing.
Yes. So the book is available in print on Amazon, and then Audible and Kindle. The audio version, as I said, is currently up on my podcast, which is The Better You with Kacie Main. And you can find that pretty much anywhere where you get your podcast. So I think it's episode 27, 28, and 29. I broke it up into like 2-hour parts. So you can listen to that for free right now if you enjoy Audibles. And yeah, the podcast is weekly, and it, no surprisingly, focuses on our relationship with ourselves. So I bring on a lot of different experts, I usually see it as like 3 different buckets, like mind, body, or spirit, because I think all 3 of those things play integral parts of our relationship with ourselves. And I'm on social media. It's usually Kacie Main Writes, WRITES. Website, KacieMain.com. You can find all my articles, my freelance writing, my blog, all the podcasts, everything on the website.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kacie, for coming on the show. I have enjoyed you, and I know that everybody else has, and I know that we've sparked an interest. People are going to want to go out and read your book, of course. So thank you so much again. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and until next time, peace. And of course, don't forget,